configuration that they're issued, and off duty they don't necessarily have a clue. So in many cases they're just like the rest of us, just trying to figure this stuff out on their own. Um, Once you have all these tools, again, if you can get a training replica of your knife and a training replica of your gun. So this is a cert training pistol. This is it's not a real pistol, but you can work trigger control stuff with it. It's got the laser. It's got a weighted magazine. Um, it's self-resetting. You can get blue guns or red guns, dummy plastic guns. But any non-firing, not a live weapon, that will fit in your actual holster that you're going to be carrying, I would get one of those. I'd get a training gun and a training blade. And then what you want to do is you want to start to actually play around with your combatives, your empty hand skills, with all that stuff on, and start to figure out what works and what doesn't. Sometimes you may think that carrying a knife in a certain orientation makes a lot of sense, and then you go to get into a little bit of a scrap with a training buddy, and you're rolling around, and next thing you know, a knife's falling out or a gun's falling out, and obviously that's something that we want to avoid. So if we can prepare for that stuff ahead of time by playing with it on the mats in the gym, in a sterile training environment, that would absolutely be my recommendation. You certainly don't want to go out on the street and get into a tussle with a bad guy and find out the hard way that, you know, your carry setup is less than optimal. Knives are falling out, guns are falling out, or even worse, the bad guy is taking the tools from you. Okay, I posted a video very recently of the guys from ShivWorks, Craig Douglas, and some of his people doing an evolution at one of their ECQC classes, and there was a student on the ground that had another student on top of him, and he ended up getting his knife taken from him by the aggressor. That's exactly the kind of thing that I'm talking about that we want to avoid. So by having a non-functional training weapon, be it a pistol and or a blade, and training with those in your combatives classes or whatever you're doing, you're going to figure that stuff out ahead of time. So you're going to minimize the likelihood that someone's going to take your own weapons off of you and use them against you. Okay, obviously that's the last thing that we want to have happen. You carry weapons for defensive application. You carry weapons to protect yourself. You don't want to end up introducing those weapons to the bad guy and have the bad guy take them from you. That being said, while we're on that topic, I think a lot of people in some cases carry way too much stuff. You've got people carrying multiple guns, multiple knives, and all this other stuff, and the reality is in most cases those people probably lack the combative training that's necessary to be able to support retaining all that stuff. You know, the more tools you have on you, the more tools you have to retain, the more things you're responsible for. So if I'm carrying 5 knives and 2 guns, that's 5 knives and 2 guns I have to make sure no one else gets a hold of if we get into a tussle. That can be difficult. So I would definitely recommend, you know, again, whatever you're going to carry, get training replicas of all those things and roll with them. Bring them to the gym. As Paul just said, don't carry weapons to give to the bad guy. And Brian, yeah, you got to stay light. I agree. A gun, a knife, a spare magazine. I like to carry a flashlight, and I generally carry a tourniquet and a pack of quick clot combat gauze in my pocket just to have some type of medical capability should the need arise. But I don't think you need to get into carrying, you know, many knives or many guns. And if you're going to do that, if you're doing something that's high risk and you need a backup weapon, you know, you need a secondary pistol, that's fine. I'm not saying that that's the end of the world. I'm just saying you want to train for that. You want to make sure that wherever you're carrying that pistol or edge weapon, whatever the other weapon you're carrying is, however you're carrying it on your body, you want to make sure that you've trained for that, you've practiced for that, you've drilled it, you've rolled around with some guys at the gym, and it's going to stay put. It's going to be accessible to you when you need to get to it, and it's not going to be accessible to anyone else. We know a guy with 10 knives at all times. Ryan, unfortunately, I know a lot. I know who you're talking about, but I know a lot of people like that that think that the more knives you carry, the tougher you are. And the reality is, a lot of those people just don't know how to fight. They can't fight their way out of a wet paper bag, so they try to supplement or substitute the software with the hardware. They go out and they get more tools, they get more gadgets and more crap, and they still don't know how to fight. So my recommendation would be less hardware, more software. Buy less guns and knives and tools, and get yourself enrolled at a gym. Learn how to strike, learn how to grapple, and then learn how to do those things with the presence of weapons. Craig and his guys at Shivworks, they use the term weapons-based environment, grappling in the weapons-based environment, striking in the weapons-based environment. I like 99% of what they do. That's one of the only things I don't love is that terminology, weapons-based environment. To me, that's just life, right? Once I walk out the door of the gym, everything is a weapons-based environment. I'm assuming always that everyone else is armed, even though they might not be. But I never know. So you have to approach every situation, especially working in the nightclub business, working in law enforcement, working in a security capacity. Excuse me, you want to approach every situation with the assumption that the other person is armed, and be very, very cautious. When you start grappling and doing jiu-jitsu and doing things with the presence of weapons, it's going to change a lot of what you do. Being stuck in a triangle and reaching back through the leg and thinking, oh, I've got that guy in a triangle now, and he made a mistake by putting his arm in between my legs. Well, in all actuality, if he's reaching back there to grab a blade and he starts sticking you with it, it's very, very different. So when we grapple here and we incorporate edge weapons, the focus is on making sure that we know where the other person's hands are, and then ideally we can control them as much as possible. And the other thing I like to think about when we get into any type of entanglement, any type of grappling or clinch work that involves weapons, I like to use the terminology position before access. So if you think about old school jiu-jitsu, the mindset was position before submission. I want to get to an advantageous position, and then I want to attack for the submission. If I'm looking to access a tool in an entanglement, whether it's a stand-up clinch, whether it's a ground fight, whatever the case may be, I want to make sure that I have a position that's going to support my ability to do that. So in other words, if we're in a head and arm clinch and I just simply reach down to grab my gun, it's probably not the best time for that, because I haven't done anything to affect you, the bad guy. I really haven't earned the opportunity to draw that weapon and bring that weapon to play. If I were to do something simple like, say, arm drag and take the person's back and then access the weapon, that might make a little bit more sense. You're going to be less likely to be able to foul my draw. You're going to be less likely to take my weapon from me. I'm going to have the time and opportunity to get my weapon out and get it in play. So position before access is what I teach here in terms of weapon stuff integrated with combatives. Thanks, Ryan. Very good point. Some people can use that the environment as a weapon, what's around them, to improvise. Those are the people to train for. Yeah, that's true. Brian, I agree with you. Thank you. Yeah, Brian, to add on to what you said about the environment, my edge stuff is very simple, and a lot of the reason it's so simple is that I want you to be able to pick up just about anything and be able to use it in that fashion. In other words, if I carry a very specific knife and it's kind of got one-dimensional, it's like a one-trick pony, I'm going to use a karambit as an example because it's a very unique blade, right? If I carry a karambit and that's my go-to blade, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is, if I don't have it on me and I go to grab a pen, I'm not going to be able to do exactly the same things I would do with a pen as I will with a karambit. With the pakal, you can do very similar things with a screwdriver, with an ice pick, with a pen, with anything that's strong and sturdy and pointy. So it's why a lot of the stuff that I advocate is point driven, stabby stuff, not slashy stuff, and that way you can carry that stuff over from one tool to the next. So you don't have to have a specific weapon with you, but you can rather use those weapons or anything that's around you. Improvised weapons is a very important skill. If you're going places where weapons are not permissible, but you can access other things like pens or whatever, then you can pretty much use whatever you got around you. Thoughts on deployment motions by the other guy, leading on from assuming he had a weapon. Okay, so Paul, you're saying if I'm assuming the bad guy has a weapon and then he deploys it, I'm talking about deployment motions. So one of the things I think about in terms of deployment is any type of rearward articulation with the elbow. Okay, so I don't know if you can see me, but if I have to do this, so if I'm drawing a pistol from the 3 or 4 o'clock, I have to do this, and that would be considered rearward articulation of the elbow. For me, I try to minimize or eliminate as much of that as possible. Okay, if someone's drawing for the 3 or 4 o'clock position, what happens is there's a gap here in between the arm and the body. Okay, as a grappler, if I can shoot that gap and start to isolate the arm from the body, I can get into a position of control. And if you have a weapon, a tool, let's say you have a training pistol or a pistol in that hand, I can start to isolate that from your body. If it's an edge weapon, same thing. I can start to isolate that from your body. So rearward articulation of the elbow for me is something that I would try to avoid. It's one of the benefits of carrying appendix style as far as firearms are concerned. It's also another benefit of carrying from your hips forward with all your lethal fighting tools. So whether it's edge weapons or firearms, you're going to minimize or eliminate the amount of rearward articulation that you have to do with the elbow. So that's something that I look for. If they're reaching for it, Paul, if the bad guy's reaching for it, and they're articulating that elbow rearward, I assume that they're going for a tool, whether it be a knife or a gun. I might not know yet. I might know if I did my initial assessment thoroughly and I started to, Paul, you're very much like me, so I'm sure when you're talking to people, you're kind of scanning them up and down and looking for bulges and pocket clips and all that kind of stuff and thinking, okay, well, clearly that guy has a knife or seems to have a gun. I do it all the time. My wife jokingly tells me what a tool I am because I'm always pointing out, hey, that guy's got a gun on and that guy's got 2 knives and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, if I see the elbow articulating in a rearward fashion, I'm absolutely thinking weapon. I'm thinking he's going for a weapon, and I'm going to shoot that gap if I need to. If I'm not going to create space and get away or just punch him in the face, I'm probably going to shoot that gap and try to get to a control position. So 2-on-1, like a Russian tie, I'm sucking his arm in, flaring my elbows out and getting that arm locked out and starting to isolate the hand away from the body so that whatever's in that hand, again, gun, knife, doesn't really matter, I can make sure that they're not going to get it in play and start to use it against me. So that's my thoughts on that. I hope that answers your question, Paul. If not, just hit me with a follow-up. What else? Let's see. We talked a little bit about retention. Oh, accessing from the clinch. Okay, so generally you've got 3 phases of unarmed combat. You've got standing free movement, which is striking range or greater, right? So punching, kicking doesn't really matter, but we're in striking range. We're not actually connected in any way yet. The second phase of unarmed combat would be clinch. And I define a clinch as any time where we're connected in any way. It could be you grab my wrist. It could be I grabbed your head. It could be over-under. It could be double unders. Any time where we're physically connected, I would define that as a clinch. And then the third phase of unarmed combat is ground. All right, so standing free movement, clinch, and ground. People, when they carry firearms, a lot of times they go to the range, they work their draws, they get a sub 1 second or sub 1.5 second draw, and they're very happy with that, and that's all they ever think about. And that's fine, and that's a valuable skill to have, and I think that that's something that is absolutely not a bad thing, and it's not something that you shouldn't work on. But I look at it a little bit differently. If you're going to access a weapon of any kind, whether it's a firearm or a knife, I think the possibility for you to need to do that from a clinch, from some type of a clinch, is pretty great. In all the years of nightclub stuff that I've done, almost every fight that I've ever witnessed went to clinch at one point or another. Okay, so what ended up happening was the 2 parties were fighting, they were arguing.